Yes.
Mr. Lister, I have a handful of questions for you from call participants and their recognised legal representatives. The first is really a follow-up question from what we were talking about before the lunchtime break about identifying beneficiaries. Shamik, can we have CAXT 5035_078? So this is the Caxton Foundation report, annual report, 31st March 2015. Can we turn to page 8 of that report, please? So we can see on the first paragraph there that stage 1 payments, this is from Skipton, have been made to 5,200 people. And then if we go down to the second half of the page under Caxton's beneficiary community, second paragraph there, starting the impact, we can see about halfway through that paragraph, by March, 31st of March 2015, which is just before you left, the number of Caxton beneficiaries had risen to 1,080, and then we see the sharp rise. Were you or were the board concerned about the disparity still between the number of beneficiaries that had registered with Skipton for stage 1 payments and the number that had registered with the Caxton? Because even after the look back, there's still almost more than a 4,000 difference.
I mean, as a result of the look back, everyone who received a Skipton stage 1 should have been told about Caxton. I mean, it may well be that, it was always the case in our assumptions that a number of stage 1 people would not feel that they needed support from Caxton, certainly at any one stage, possibly because they had not yet, they were not yet feeling unwell, or they didn't want to seek support for a range of reasons. So, I don't think we were complacent about it, but I think that, and I think we would have expected numbers to continue to increase as people who were stage 1 people who are now aware of Caxton perhaps felt that they would benefit from the support of the charity.
Moving on now to a different topic. What was your understanding of the need for read across between the different charities, the Alliance House organisations?
Yes, this was something that was talked about a lot, and I sort of picked up in, I think, the paper I wrote around beneficiary concerns. There was certainly an expectation, I think, that Caxton would provide equivalent support to Macfarlane, but alongside that, a recognition that obviously Caxton would give need to the particular needs of its own beneficiaries, which might mean that we might diverge in some ways from what Macfarlane did. So I don't think the notion of read across was something that was intended to mean that everything that Macfarlane did, Caxton would do, and vice versa. But it seemed reasonable to try to ensure that where there was, where you could make decent comparisons, that the level of support was broadly comparable. And I did have discussions during my time on the Welfare Committee with Elizabeth Boyd, who chaired the Macfarlane Committee, just to make sure that we were broadly in line. And there's also a paper that was produced by Ros Riley, I think, which is among the papers released to me that compares Caxton and Macfarlane and sort of looks.
Is that the paper called something like HIV HCV anomalies or something?
Something like that, yes. I think it was produced because we had a request, possibly via an MP, I'm not sure, to give some information to Department of Health.
I think it's.
Yes,
I've
I
just
think that's the one. That's the one I'm thinking of.
it's.
That
I've just
goes
found it
through
and
and
I've
sort
just
of
lost it.
compares the two organisations. I mean, the main difference at that stage was that Macfarlane had their top-up scheme and were given very comparatively little out in discretionary one-off grants, and we were at that point entirely focused on discretionary grants.
I think the document you're referring to is AH.
Fixed bank loans. Sorry.
The document you're referring to is AHOH 5065. Is that the document?
The one.
Yeah.
That's the one. I think this was done sometime in 2012, possibly around September 2012, something like that. Just to have a brief summary of the differences between the two. And as you can see from this, there's quite a deal of read across. So both have access to the council in fund, both refer to the Specials Benefit Advisor, Neil Bateman. The vouchers issue, we were still at that stage giving people vouchers for white goods, etc., although we later on dropped that, given beneficiaries' understandable dislike of it. And there was slight difference in the way that we made fuel payments, I think, going further down.
So if we go, yep.
So, I mean, when Caxton started off, we, a lot of our policies were based on policies that had been used by Macfarlane. We had the same office guidelines. We had staff who had previously and were still providing support for Macfarlane as well as for us, and a chief executive who'd been the chief executive of the Macfarlane Trust for a number of years. So actually achieving read across where it was important was not difficult. I think the main thing is, my understanding is that it didn't constrain us from doing things a bit differently if it felt that doing things differently was in the interest of our beneficiaries.
Was consideration ever given to putting in a funding bid to the Department of Health for a regular payment scheme along the same lines, effectively on the basis that this is what the Macfarlane Trust have got and this is what we want? So read across in terms of the regular payment.
Yeah, I mean, we took the decision at the outset not to have a top-up scheme, as it was called at that point, for the reasons we discussed earlier, that there was uncertainty about beneficiary numbers and beneficiary need, and we didn't actually know what that scheme would need to look like. And as we've discussed as well, there would have been the opportunity to perhaps to have some one-off additional payments to people, at least in, after the first year before the regular payment scheme was established, where we knew that people were in particular poverty. And although we did that on occasions, there wasn't a recognised scheme that people could apply to. So we didn't apply to the department at this stage because we didn't know what we would need to ask for.
When can you recall when the policy of Caxton changed to so that applications for grants could be made for grants that weren't associated with hepatitis C infection? So when it widened out.
I can't exactly. I'm not sure how much we ever really applied that. in practice. I recall in the early days of the welfare committee, the question being asked, what was this, is this connected to hepatitis C? And we stopped asking that pretty quickly, I think, as I say, in recognition of the fact that that was almost immaterial. So I think quite early on, but I can't recall exactly when.
And was that change of policy intimated to beneficiaries?
I'm not sure we'd ever said to beneficiaries that we were going to that what the policy was in the first place. So I'm not sure that we did. I'm pretty certain we didn't discuss the change with beneficiaries, because as we've discussed at this stage, without any forum for doing that, we weren't having any discussion with beneficiaries about policy issues.
Do you think that the fact that there was this, there may have been this early policy only to make payments in relation to applications related to hepatitis C, could have been one of the reasons why so many early applications were declined?
No, I mean, I think it's overstated it to say that was a policy as such. I mean, I think it was a question we asked in looking at applications. Was this, could this debt be related to hepatitis C? But actually, I was over the break, I was having a look back at the National Welfare Committee minutes just to try and do a quick analysis, because we'd looked at the sums of money requested and the sums of money given. I think I was a little bit concerned that was perhaps didn't give a clear enough picture. So I just looked back quickly over the first year of the National Welfare Committee. And as I suspected, a lot of people submitted multiple applications. So their grant application contained requests for more than one item. And looking at those, I think we only fully declined one. If we declined things, we declined some things and not others. So looking at, if you're interested in the figures I came up with, I sort of looked at November 11 to November 12, and bear in mind this is just the Welfare Committee, it doesn't take account of anything agreed by the office, and there's no way of telling from the record when people came back again. So I'm looking at sort of 192 people submitting requests for 300 items over that period, but some of those might have been return requests from people. So out of the 192, 127 requested one item only. And of those, we agreed 91, deferred 21, and declined 15. And then in addition to that, there were 65 requests for more than one item. And of those, we only fully declined one, and for the rest of them, people got something of what they want. 32 got everything they asked for, and I think the rest got some and not everything. So there were very few people whose applications we declined entirely. Those we did were for, I think at this stage, for large areas of debt, which obviously we went on to address in a different way, or for other sort of high cost issues. And because we often decline some of the higher cost issues, that sort of impacts on the way that it looks when you just look at the financials. So, I mean, because my recollection very much is that our inclination on the Welfare Committee was towards agreeing applications where we felt we could, where we felt the charitable need was justified. So we were very much looking for reasons to agree rather than decline. And as I said, it was unfortunate that we deferred so many, and it took a while for us to communicate better with beneficiaries about the kind of information we needed, for example, in looking at applications for debt.
I'm moving on to a different topic now. In your witness statement, in a couple of places, you say that you were shocked about the extent of the poverty in the beneficiary community. Can you tell us why you were shocked by that?
Well, in my middle-class naivety, I'm guessing, I hadn't appreciated how people, there were people living simply on disability living allowance. So people living on as little as 7,000 a year in some instances, and that did take me aback. It perhaps shouldn't have done, but it did, and that was why I became convinced very early on that we needed some kind of regular payment system to lift people in that position out of that level of poverty. And again, that had, in a sense, may or may not have had anything to do with whether they had hepatitis C, but the fact is that they were victims of this tragedy and they were in poverty, and I felt very strongly that should be a priority for us to address.
Did you get a sense of whether your fellow trustees, and in particular the founding trustees, were aware of the levels of poverty in the beneficiary community, or in some parts of the beneficiary community?
I can't speak for others. I certainly made sure that the board as a whole were aware of this. As I've said, part of the reason for giving the boards regular updates on the issues we were finding on the welfare committee was to make them aware of the situation faced by a number of beneficiaries. Because unless you were on the welfare committee or unless you were a member of staff looking at applications, I don't think you could get a real feel for what people were experiencing. And we were only sort of seeing the tip of the iceberg, I suspect, in what people were prepared to tell us. Although, at that stage, we did, there were occasions when members of staff, with agreement from beneficiaries, visited homes to talk to them in more detail about their needs. Because certainly in some cases, for the poorest people, they may have applied for something, and I think our thought was, well, there's more that we could do here. So let's have a conversation with them about what more we can help them with. So it wasn't just a case of waiting for somebody to apply for a grant. We were much more proactive in saying to some people, look, there are other things that we could perhaps do here.
So in the way, given that you hadn't appreciated the levels of poverty in the beneficiary community, do you think that was something that the Department of Health, and in particular the Blood Policy Unit, was also ignorant of at the time that you were there?
Well, possibly initially, but certainly I also did as a report of the board's first year, and which was sent to Department of Health. When I submitted the paper to the board on beneficiary debt, one of the outcomes from the minutes was to, I think, share that with the Department of Health. When we submitted the business case for the regular payment scheme, we included 3 anonymised case histories, because I really wanted to show Department of Health what this meant to real people. I'd hoped that by framing this in terms of what was happening in people's lives, that would be a more powerful way of persuading the department to provide the funding we were looking for.
You may not be able to answer this, but do you think that that when the Caxton Foundation was set up, that there was a level of ignorance, both from the founding trustees and from the Department of Health about the level of financial need amongst the beneficiary community?
I'm sure there was. I mean, I think it was only until we started receiving the census forms, receiving grant applications from people, that we got a real picture of what was going on in people's lives and the level of poverty. I think I don't know what information had been made available before then, but I think that was the point at which, for me anyway, I can't obviously speak for other people, it was fully understood.
And does it follow from that the financial allocation made to the Caxton Foundation on that imperfect understanding of the financial needs of the community was inadequate?
I think ultimately it was. I mean, I don't know the basis on which the allocation was made within the department. As you perhaps know already, these amounts are sort of top sliced from the department's overall allocation before monies go to frontline NHS services, and there would have been a bid made by the Blood Policy Unit to the department's finance directorate for a certain amount of money, and that then became the baseline for the funding we received each year. I don't know on what basis that was arrived at. It was unfortunate that in the first, up until 2014-15 was the first year in which we spent the full allocation, and of course would have liked to have spent by then a huge amount more. So I think that made probably made it harder to say to the department, well, we haven't spent in these first 2 years, and now we're looking for a bid of, I can't remember what it was, I think we were looking for an extra 3 million or roughly at that point. Yeah, I can't fully answer that question, but I suspect that it was there probably wasn't a lot of data behind the selection of that figure of 2.38 million.
So those are the questions that I had from the core participants that I'm going to ask.
Yes, well, I've got just 2 or 3 questions. The first goes back to the issue that you were asked about when you were asked what relevance did the previous grant record of an individual applicant have in determining the application that you are now considering. And you said, well, it had none. We made our decision on the basis of the application. But you did say that you thought that the information as to what had been had previously was of use. Now, what use was it if it wasn't in some way helpful in determining either the application or the amount that was going to be given?
I think it was perhaps useful in indicating a level of need, and giving us I think had we not had, I'm trying to sort of come at this from the other way, had we not had any information about what had been provided so far, I think we would have not had a full understanding of how Caxton was supporting that particular beneficiary. I think in some cases where people came back to apply pretty regularly, there were a handful of cases where we saw a fresh application at all meetings, more or less, of the Welfare Committee, that it sort of began to indicate maybe there is more of a sort of problem here about managing finances that requires a deeper look.
So that might be an answer, that the use was in deciding whether there might need to be some further help given.
Yes. So it might that information might have indicated that this is perhaps uh, a case to have the money management advisor take a look at the situation, which we did in a number of circumstances, and those were often the circumstances where we might have said, "Look, we've provided a very large amount of support over the past year. You're coming back to us time after time for something new. Um, we think it's probably time to for you to see the money management advisor to sort of take a detailed look at your finances to see if there's something more here that we can help with, or some underlying problem that we can perhaps help you address."
Yes, thank you for that. The second question is in respect of those who are Skipton registrants. Only about 25% or thereabouts seem to have registered with Caxton. And yet everyone who was eligible for Skipton was eligible for Caxton. And they would have been given, had they become registrants, they would have been entitled to and got the degree of regular pay that was given.
If their income had been low, yes.
So, can you help as to, did you ever wonder why people who could have had, if I can use the expression, money for the asking, didn't ask?
Yes. I think I don't have any definitive answer to that, though, and anything I say will be purely speculation. Not everybody clearly wants to ask. A number of people may have felt that the last thing they wanted to do was to go to a charity like Caxton, and a lot of people felt it was coming with a begging bowl, felt it was a demeaning thing to do. And I can see that perhaps some people would have been put off by that.
So, in essence, this is, or could be, if you're right, powerful evidence that the begging bowl approach was something which, despite all the difficulties, people found intolerable.
I mean, certainly that's the message we had from some of our beneficiaries, that they although they applied rather reluctantly, because this was the only system available to provide support. But I think there was certainly a dislike of coming to ask for support, which people might rightly feel should have been an entitlement rather than something to come and ask for and have to disclose personal information about one's finances, etc.
Well, that was going to be the next part of my question, whether there was something about the application process, at least as potential registrants understood it, that might have put them off.
That's possible. I mean, we did try, I think, to ask for as little information as could be justified, given that we had the task of providing support to meet charitable need. We've had all that discussion earlier on about, therefore, public benefit and also the use of public money, that we needed to ask a certain number of questions to determine whether charitable need was justified, and those questions are inevitably intrusive. There was a point, I think it was at the beginning of 2013, where I talked to a number of other grant-giving organisations, benevolent funds, etc., to find out how they operated, to see if there was anything that Caxton could learn from that. And I think in many cases we asked for less information than a number of those did. So, and we certainly didn't, probe people very much about their expenditure. Other grant-giving bodies have a tendency to sort of question whether people need to spend money on X or Y. We did not do that. We simply looked at the balance between someone's income and expenditure, the top line figure, if you like, to see what their financial situation was like without probing deeper into the reasons for that. So to that extent, we were less intrusive than some others. That sort of look at what others did as well helped us design an application form for grants that was more easier, I hope, for beneficiaries than the sort of just write in and ask us approach. So I think it would have been difficult, given the way that we were set up, to ask for less information than we did, because it would have been difficult to assess charitable need had we done so.
Yes, thank you. In the course of the evidence you've given to us, this is the last question I want to ask you. You have identified a number of points at which you say, albeit from today's perspective, Caxton could have done things better. Can I ask you, without necessarily going over that list again, what do you think, how do you think the Caxton Foundation could have done things better?
Okay, I think we could have sometimes been a bit less risk averse and in the early stages put out a press statement and hopefully found one of our beneficiaries who would have been happy to have sort of talked to the media about Caxton. So I think we perhaps were, as I said, put off by the fear that campaigners who felt that Caxton shouldn't exist would hijack, if you like, any attempt at publicity and perhaps put people off from coming to us. That was certainly a view, and it was a view that prevailed. And I think, with the benefit of hindsight, we should have, reckoned that any publicity would be better than none, and gone out. It wouldn't have taken a huge amount to put out a press statement and to have found one or two people who are willing to talk to the media about it from what our beneficiaries. So I think we missed a trick there at the beginning. We were then, I think then, to be honest, in our first year of operation, it didn't help that Martin Harvey unfortunately was very, very ill and was perhaps not as attentive to things as he might have been. And it took until 2013 for some of those poorer staff practices to be dealt with. So to begin with, we had some old-fashioned things like everybody took a lunch hour. Nobody answered the phones over lunch. Exactly, and there were dreadful delays sometimes. It was a constant complaint from us on the welfare committee that we sometimes saw applications come into us that had been submitted sometime before. And again, it took until 2013 when Jan arrived to make some fairly, radical changes to the way that staff worked. One or two people left as a result of that, and we became much more efficient. And certainly, I think by the time that I left in 2015, our turnaround time for grant applications had vastly improved. At the beginning, it was very poor, I think, a lot of the time, and applicants sometimes had to wait far too long to get a result. The other issue, of course, was around the amount of information we placed on our website to support beneficiaries in understanding what they could claim for. And again, I think we should, in hindsight, have done more about that. I did work at the time to improve the quality of what was available and to improve the information that applicants were given, so that when they submitted a first application, it stood more of a chance of giving us all the information we wanted. We had too many deferrals, so coupled with delays in getting things to the committee, if we then deferred an application to ask for yet more funding, that was not good at all. So we did make sure that, for example, when people were applying for help with debt, that they were told in advance what information the Welfare Committee would need to make a decision. So there were attempts to certainly improve things. And I do feel that, as I say, by the time that I'd left, we'd got good turnaround time on grants. We'd got better, but if not ideal, information on the website. We had, thanks to the look back exercise, a larger group of beneficiaries, and we had a regular payment scheme, which was then sort of continued in the year after I left and beyond that. So I felt when I left that we had travelled quite a long way over that 3-year period in vastly improving the services that we provided.
It may perhaps be clear from the way in which you say you travelled quite a long way that you thought there was yet further to go. Where would you have gone?
Well, I think firstly one of the questions that's been asked of other witnesses is why didn't we push harder when the bid for the regular payment scheme was turned down? And at the time, it felt like we'd had a firm Department of Health rejection. That's all that we could have done about it. Again, I wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, whether that was so. We had quite a compelling case, given poverty among our beneficiaries. We could have written to the Secretary of State about that. We could have engaged the Haemophilia Society and campaign groups in doing the same. So we needn't possibly have taken no for an answer. And again, I think there's something maybe about being, and although we were not in any way in the pocket of the Department of Health, although the Department of Health did not interfere with our policies or anything about the day-to-day running of the organisation, and having served on a number of charity boards since then, I didn't feel any different at Caxton than I have done on being on the board of an independent charity. But I do wonder whether the very fact that we were funded by the Department of Health, had an accountability relationship with the Department of Health, perhaps made us less inclined for that reason to challenge a decision that we were all vastly disappointed by.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Mr. Lister, is there anything you would like to add to your evidence?
The only thing I wondered is there was a sort of question raised about the incorporation of the charity. Do you have everything you need to know about that, or do you want to ask me any questions about it, so I can perhaps fill in some?
Well, you're talking there about the
creation of Caxton Trustee Limited,
becoming the corporate trustee of the trust. So that's really a question for you.
No, I don't think I need any specific help on that, but thank you very much all the same.
Okay. In which case, I have nothing more to add.
Well, I do. I want to add my thanks. I know we will highly likely to see you again, and I rather look forward to it after this lively, reflective, and frank evidence which you've given. What's focused, I think, on the harsh realities of the lives which many of your beneficiaries lived. and you've been refreshingly prepared to criticise where you thought criticism was due, without shrinking back into being defensive, as perhaps many may be instinctively inclined to do. So can I thank you in particular for that, and for the sense of objective detachment, as it were, disinterest in the proper sense of the word, which you've shown in giving the evidence you have. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again in due course.
Thank you.
But not next week, when we have what,
No.
Miss Scott?
Next week, on Tuesday the 30th, we have the Belfast presentation, and that will run over into the following day. And then on the Thursday of that week, we have oral evidence given remotely by Dr. Benson.
Yes, so next week we're focused largely on Belfast, and 10 o'clock we start on Tuesday. Thank you very much. Thank you.